The Moton Mailbag is brought to you by the Robert Russo Moton Museum, located in Farmville, Virginia. The Moton Museum is a civil rights museum focusing on the history of Prince Edward County between 1951 and 1964.
Hi, I'm Kanan Townsend, Director of Education at the Moton Museum.
And this is Leah Brown, the Assistant Director for Education.
And welcome back to the Moton Mailbag, Season 2, Episode 3. We are back by popular demand. And that's a good theme because somebody else is with us, back by popular demand.
Who? It's me!
Irene, how are things going?
They are going pretty well. Yeah, I'm happy to be back again. Really enjoyed being here last time, and I'm excited for the conversations that we're going to have today.
Yeah, and I was just kind of sitting in the audio booth last time watching them to record, and I was like, this looks like so much fun, I got to get back on. So we just decided to have all three of us here, and that's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be okay. So what's new, y'all? What's happening in life? We are halfway through October, believe it or not, which is surreal.
Yes.
Spooky season, fall. You know, how's everybody doing? How's decorating houses and things going for everybody?
Okay, so Target was supposed to have a new line of like nicer, cutesy Halloween stuff. And I was like, yes. So I rolled up to Target and I saw a couple things that are new, but I could not justify buying a haunted sloth. But I did think about it. Yes.
A haunted sloth.
Yeah. So the sloth was wearing like a jack-o'-lantern orange onesie. And I was like, bruh, that's cute. That's really cute. But then, where would I do with it? Where would I put it?
I wouldn't even know how to pitch that.
Yeah.
Like, if I was like, you know, we need an idea.
Mm-hmm,
Sloth.
Mm-hmm. There was
sweater. Like, I don't.
Sweater.
That's such an odd, like.
It's a onesie, not a sweater.
turtleneck, whatever it is. Like, this is a very, like.
A cardigan.
I wouldn't even know how to pitch that.
And there was, in like the Target paper, a nifty like sloth hanging from the door, like a door hanger. And I was like, oh, yes. And I thought, wouldn't just fall off your door. Because, you know, my command strips work for like a hot minute. But then it's just like, what's that noise in the house? So, yeah.
I'm just not a big Halloween gal. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not my my cup of tea.
It's not your cup of candy.
No, it's
No.
not.
I feel like some things, just like when you're a kid, it's just different. Like every holiday, like I feel like, except Thanksgiving, I feel like that's reversed. Like I feel like I didn't like Thanksgiving as a kid, but now I'm an adult. I'm like, yes, give me that
about
food.
to eat.
But like Halloween and Christmas and like I don't know, mostly those two for me at least. Like it was just like great as a kid, yeah, this is great, and now I'm just like, you know, they're all right. I mean, you know, being around family is nice and stuff. But like as like an adult, like. You can just go buy candy. Like I could just go buy my own candy. Like I don't know. It's just different.
I mean, it does make sense, absolutely. Like for Halloween, for me, I like Halloween movies, but I don't like scary movies. So it's like balancing that and then like my actual aesthetic. Because you know I have bats hanging in my house. So, and like for Christmas, I remember when I was like, oh, this is miserable. Like this is not fun anymore. Like being an adult at Christmas, like you enjoy watching the kids open stuff, but I already bought what I needed like 2 months ago. So
yeah, it's like if you have like if I want a TV, like I'll just go like if I have the money, you know, I'll just go buy a TV. Like the idea of wrapping it and like I could buy a TV in April. Like why am I going to wait until December? Like maybe November for like Black Friday or something.
No,
but like,
Black Friday. I love Black Friday now that I'm getting older. It's great.
it's like a change happens.
Change.
We went from Christmas to Black Friday.
Y'all remember like Black Friday back in the day, like when it was like people, the lines and like people.
Yeah,
like,
it was on Black Friday.
Like it was like really bizarre. Like, but I went last year.
People getting mauled.
I went last year and there was just like a pallet of TVs just sitting there, like 60-inch, like, you know, by the time I left, I think there was only like 1 or 2 left, but like, I was like, man, this is 10 years ago. Like, there would have been mobs.
Yeah.
Like, it's just crazy how far things have come and how things evolved in technology and online shopping.
Well, I'm thinking this year, you know, Black Friday, but make it COVID.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, how is that gonna
Goodness.
Yeah.
change things?
I mean, actually Cyber Monday, I feel like.
Yeah.
But also now,
And Prime Day,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
this week.
this week, like if I don't have to go to a store, I don't go to the store anymore.
Yeah.
It's not a casual trip. It's like
Right.
we have a purpose or we're
Yeah.
at home.
Right. Well, I have a segue.
Okay, I'm ready.
My little one, we finished 1,000 books before kindergarten this week. Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm just like,
She's well read.
1,000 books before kindergarten, tried 1,000 books before nap time.
No,
She
look
literally reads and reads and reads, and she will literally read like 10 books in a row if you let her. And it's just like,
Yes.
girl, can we do something else? Like, I appreciate your love of literature, but like, can we do something else?
Let's watch a YouTube video.
Let's watch TV. Like, please.
Pick that book up.
Screen time, please. It's just like, no, book. So the reason I brought that up, one, because it was pretty neat, but two, because I think it's a perfect segue into our first question. I'll ask you all, and then we can always kind of riff and kind of go back to it from there. So, first question, what are some good books about the Milton School Story?
So the first book that I really read about the Moton School Story was Bound for Freedom by Neil Sullivan, who came into the county and really sort of orchestrated the opening of the free school. And that one was just really interesting to me because of the first person account of what it was like to be here during a time when the idea of opening a desegregated integrated school was really just still so radical, and the amount of pushback that he got from the local community, you know, people calling his hotel, you know, with threats and all this, you know, but his persistence to say this is something that's important. These children really need to be in school, and I want to help them. I thought that was just so interesting.
Yeah, that's a great book, and that's probably one of two, you know, the main recommendations we give for, you know, people who ask what do we read about, you know, the Moton School Story. I mean, in that case in particular too, I mean, basically like a month out or something, or like 2 weeks, like he had very like no notice, or like, we need you to open the school. And he's like, all right, hired the staff, got the equipment, rented the school. Like it's a fascinating read if anybody gets the chance to read it. What about you, Leah? What you thinking?
So, they closed their schools. That was the first book I read when I began here at Moton. And it was an exhausting read because it's so much detail and there's so much happening simultaneously. So it begins talking about Reverend Griffin coming back to Farmville. And like, I know Reverend Griffin in theory, but learning about his like experience here, along with the book covers the Moton story really. So it was overwhelming but excellent in detail. I want to go back and reread to see which names I now that I know the community better. One of our storytellers, Miss Joy, she told me her granddad's in the book. So we're talking about her family history on top of just talking with her. I'm like, yes, give me all your information. Tell me all these stories that I'm never going to know otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the definitive book. Like, that's the Moton School Story book, right? Like, that's probably number one, and then Bound for Freedom is probably number two in terms of recommendations. And of course, y'all have left me to pick another book because those are kind of the number one and two for me. So how about I switch it to not young adult, like student literature. So I'm going to go with Girl from the Tar Paper School, which is probably the best-selling item in our bookstore pretty consistently over the years, by Terry Canfield. Really does a really great job of telling the story as it happens, but also kind of having some documents and some really cool pictures in there as well. Really good for kind of middle school aged students, and really, you know, lower high school. does a really good job. Girl from the Tar Pit for School. If you want to get it, you can find it pretty easily on Amazon, or of course, shameless plug, come into our bookstore and buy it. Card only, but usually not a problem nowadays.
All right, so I have a question for you two, Kanan and Leah.
Mm-hmm.
Who has been the most impactful visitor or groups for you at Moton?
Leah, you want to go first? Or me
Yeah, I'll
first?
go first. All right, so I think the most impactful visitors are the ones that are in our galleries. You walk in like, oh, welcome to Moton. How are you guys doing? And they're like, that's me over there. Please tell me how you're in like our galleries.
Mm-hmm.
A woman came to visit with her son, and she was at Farmville High last week. So we're chatting it up, and she spoke about how when she and her husband got married, they're like, we're out, we're gone, because they saw what was happening and didn't want to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, whoa, this is a new perspective. This is a new experience.
Yeah.
Thank you for being comfortable to share that with me. So just the tidbits and stories that we gain along the way by people who lived it.
Yeah.
For me, those are the most like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that I second that. I mean, it's always really interesting, like seeing the people, like, and we, I feel like we don't even fully grasp like how significant that is. Like walking beside, like sometimes we just can get so caught up in the moment that we like take for granted the significance of the moment. So I definitely agree with that, and it's really neat having people point out, or here's where I was in third grade or whatever, with regards to the building and the space. So I'm going to take us out of the museum. I was given a presentation along with our university liaison, and we were on campus of Longwood University. It was 3 years ago, and we had the 50th anniversary of the graduating class of 1967. And I've told the story a couple of times recently, so this kind of was fresh in my mind. Really, really neat experience, because it really goes to show how, what's the word? Like history doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It's a much broader kind of context, but it's just interesting how people remember things, and then how their experience shapes kind of what they know, if that makes any sense at all. So we were presenting to them about this Milton School Story and talking about the history that happened, and graduating class in 1967. That means some of them would have been here in 62, 63. So some of them here when Martin Luther King Jr. was here, and when Bobby Kennedy was here, and a big chunk of when the schools were closed. And I tell you that we had to pick up their jaws from off the floor, because they couldn't believe all this stuff had happened here. And they were right down the road at the college, and they had absolutely no idea. And so it was fascinating to me, the types of questions and things that they were asking, because it's like, you were there. What do you mean? You're asking me, like, I just work here. Like, you were there. And it was like, we just don't know. Like, we just didn't know that happened. And so, and I was like, a lot of that's intentional, right? Like, because if you know the full or different story, like, you're going to see things differently. But to me, it's fascinating that these women, who were here, when all this stuff happened, they just were absolutely flabbergasted.
And it's sort of interesting to think about, because, Farmville is sort of always characterized as that small town. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows the town gossip, what's going on, and even then the town was just so much smaller, and that this big thing that was happening, not just here, but all over the country.
Right.
And that it was sort of just, they were in their own Longwood bubble.
Yeah. It's kind of scary if you think about it. Like, what else did y'all miss? So y'all like, ooh. But then going back to what you said, Irene, like the bubble, it's like a need to know. No one needs to know this information.
Yeah.
And thinking about because having spoken to someone who was on campus at the time, like, oh, we were told we couldn't leave. That purposeful lack of access to knowledge. That's a lot. Oof.
It was quite heavy for them. I'm certain.
Yeah.
But interesting, it was just something to think about in terms of like misinformation versus lack of access to information, which
for sure.
very much gave me, thinking about like enslavement. I know this is kind of like a different recommendation, but like, just when you think about enslaved people, like you couldn't teach them how to read. Why? If you could read, you could falsify documents or do whatever.
Yeah.
Like reading was power, right? Like
Yeah.
access to information was power. So like if you can deny people access to that,
Yeah.
then you could deny them that power. So thinking about that kind of comparison, very different but
Yeah.
similar in a
Yeah.
way. It's a very interesting
Yeah.
experience.
If you know what's going on, you could do something about
Right.
it, and you know.
Absolutely.
Going off of that, like critical thinking skills, if you have the ability to question because you have perspectives and options,
Right.
it changes your decision making because you know better, because you have access to different perspectives.
Yeah, it's very cyclical.
Yeah. Oh my god, y'all.
Didn't plan on it going there, but it did, you know.
Yeah.
It's pod. You roll with it.
Yeah. What about you, Irene?
So I haven't been at Moton for too long. It's been maybe 6 or 8 weeks or so, and just because of COVID, we haven't had a whole lot of people coming in. But I do remember when I was in 5th grade at the county school, we had a couple of women come in to talk to us about their time growing up here in Farmville, and they were actually part of the generation that was not able to go to school for 5 years. And I just remember thinking, little 5th grade me, I guess it was maybe 10 or so, thinking these women just did not have access to education, something that I didn't know at the time, but I just took for granted. And hearing their stories about how, day to day for 5 years, they would just try and do what they could to sort of get any information, try to read as much as they could, whether it was the family Bible or, if they had older siblings or older, their parents, just trying to figure out how can I stay as in tune as they could. And I just, hearing about that at such a young age it was a lot to deal with at the time, trying to figure out wow, that was really something that happened and that they had to deal with. But yeah.
It's interesting you had that take on it because often I feel like, and really students don't start to sort of get it until maybe 8th grade, but I feel and then the school's closed for 5 years. There's that'd be great. That's usually the reaction. It's oh yeah, and they thought so too for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then after that, they didn't have video games or most of them didn't have TVs. You didn't have multiple cars. You couldn't just drive to a friend's house. You were lucky if you had a sibling who didn't get on your last nerve. You were lucky if you had a friend who lived next door or down the road. Literally, school is where they went to do stuff. Everything. It's where they socialized. It's where they hung out. It's where they played. And then the school closures really took that all away from them. And so they just, they were, like you said, they would read phone books, anything that they could find to get their hands on to continue to try to continue their literacy and education. They really tried their best to, but it was difficult because they didn't have stuff. And that kind of actually is, I feel this is all the COVID comparisons, but it just reminded me students now, they're only this is awful. This is terrible because if you're doing all the remote learning, it's you're getting the worst part, not the worst parts, but you're getting all the rigor and none of the you're not getting lunch, you're not getting PE, you're not getting reset. It's just you're literally just doing work. It's just how do I just can't imagine what that is like.
Yeah, the social literacy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I was thinking this sounds like right now.
Yeah.
Because if you're staying at home, if you're being cautious, as doing what you're supposed to do, you're not going out, you're not doing things, and I'm look, it is time to do something, but also it's no, stay at home, be smart, be responsible, and then I think about students, where I grew up, it's a small community. We could walk to houses. It's convenient. But not being able to see or talk to someone or just sit beside someone.
Yeah.
And I could imagine being a 3rd grader trapped at home. Because obviously, since you're here, you have chores to do on top of doing your schoolwork on top, and it's great.
Well, that's what it was in the 60s for sure.
Yeah.
You were, they had fun.
Yeah.
I said, they had fun for 2 weeks. Yeah, that's because then the fall crops came in, and then you had to go to work. So it's
come on.
Be nice if school could open up now, and it just
please let us back.
did not. So
yeah.
And that's just the first year. Imagine
Yeah.
like year 2.
Yeah.
And then the demoralization.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
It's so much.
Scary time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, on to the last question of this episode.
Yeah.
I think this is yours, Liam.
Yeah. All right, you guys. What is the coolest object you've ever seen / replica you have touched or smelled?
You got one or should I? Okay.
Okay, yeah. I guess I kind of have two. For me, the first one, I took a tour of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And I want to say it was maybe 2018. And I was able to walk up the steps going into, I guess it's the rotunda, the top,
That's cool.
and they're the original steps that, all the founding fathers and, the original greats that sort of built our country, they walked up those same steps, and, they sort of had the indentations from where feet from just over the past 100 or couple hundred years had been walked up, and, being in that space, it was a heavy moment, sort of walking along the grates. And I guess the other interesting, coolest object that I've touched was I had the opportunity to go to Argentina the other year with my mom, and we took a tour of the Andes Mountains, which is where the Uruguayan rugby team crashed, and I want to say it was maybe 1970s, late 60s or so.
It's fairly recent.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say, 30s or 40s or something.
Yeah, no, so the Uruguayan rugby team, they crashed in the Andes Mountains on their way to a game in Chile. And I was able to talk with one of the survivors from the crash, yeah. And, hearing his story and all the things that they went through, they're up in the mountains for maybe 3 months or so, and, seeing some of the rocks that were from the mountains was just, it was heavy.
Yeah.
Oh
my gosh.
And that, for anyone who doesn't know that story, it's definitely one to look into.
Me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
We'll be doing some Googling after this.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Fairly, competent with sports tragedy, but I've missed one or two. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's, the camaraderie that, comes with being on a rugby team to begin with, but, you lose some of your teammates and family members and in this just incident, and then being able to talk with one of the survivors and, see parts of the original crash site was just,
Whoa.
it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what would you ask? What could you ask of a survivor? It would just be like, what are you willing to tell?
Yeah, exactly. It's a powerful moment. How do you talk about the loss of some of your best friends, some of your brothers, and it was amazing. It was really incredible.
Oh, 100%.
I was like, I need to think about my answer again. I'm about to hit a single, and Irene just hit a grand slam. So I do that. Speaking of founders and being in the room where it happened, I'm going to cheat because I don't touch stuff. Because
Good.
I don't touch stuff. And I don't really like it to smell stuff neither.
Yeah.
But I just remember going to Montpelier for the first time, and just the first time like stepping out kind of into the field, and I just remember looking at the trees and just thinking about how old the trees were, and it just really sincerely asking, like, what if these trees could talk? Like, what would they
the witness trees,
say?
they're amazing.
What
if they
secrets do they have?
Like, some of my ancestors could have came from this place. Like, it was something. Like, it just felt different.
Yeah.
Like going into a space, like, this doesn't really happen for me at Moton as much anymore because I'm here every day, so like it's hard to recognize what that feeling is. But like when I go to a historic place, like the air feels different.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
just you could feel the people who kind of came before you in a sense, and it just was like this really weird feeling for me. It was cool, but like it was just like, man, like what, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, like what was happening here, and then to be able to go into the house was interesting. But probably my kind of favorite experience from that is going to see their fairly new at the time exhibit, The Mere Distinction of Color, which was talking about the slave trade, and I think it shows kind of how far we have come with regards to the complexities of our founders. I would say, it really goes to show, like, they're so into the numbers and the price, and and how slavery built the entire economy. And it did not shy away from it, and I very much appreciated it. It was very interesting for me to be able to see, and it was just different because I just wouldn't imagine something like that being in one of the founders' kind of home sites. It was interesting, and it just was different.
Yeah, for sure.
Different.
Because it feels like the acknowledgement of the choices that were made versus brushing them to the side with they were great.
Yeah, but they also did some really horrendous and horrible things.
I think one of the things about being a historian, people are complex.
Right.
Yeah.
And you do a disservice to everyone, including the person, when you cut out what's inconvenient.
Yeah.
It's like, no, call a spade and move along. And you grapple with it.
Yeah.
That's how you understand how we got where we are today.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we were talking about this last week, like there's this narrative of teaching difficult history that I'm trying to get myself out of, because I think all history is difficult. Just depends on the perspective that you look at it from.
For sure.
If you look at it from the perspective of the founders, like 1776, Declaration of Independence, Revolutionary War, that was difficult. But like, what about indigenous people? What about black people? What about women? Like, all history is difficult. Even when we look back on today, like all history is inherently difficult. It just depends on what angle you're looking at it from. So I'm really trying to get out of that narrative of how to teach hard history. Well, just get rid of the hard. How to teach history, because history is inherently hard and complex and controversial to some, but it happens, right?
Well,
you can't. How can objective fact be controversial?
Yeah, and thinking about we're recording this today on what we now collectively look at as Indigenous Peoples Day, but a couple years ago it was it's Columbus Day, but realistically the tragedies that happened, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, and just the genocide of the Indigenous peoples, that he encountered, and how for so long here in the United States, for most people that was overlooked, but for the Indigenous people that it actually happened to, and for their descendants, it was never overlooked. It was always something that they remembered and that they experienced, through the memory. And for them, that's the reality of the history. They didn't have this, Christopher Columbus founded the New World. It was no, their people were murdered, and it's that sort of double-sided history that it's, depending on who you're talking to, it really just differs.
Well, I think you speak to a broader point, like how much representation matters, right? Like, because if you're not represented, then people aren't going to care about you.
Yes.
Like, for the longest time, like Indigenous people, you got the Washington football franchise, you got the Cleveland baseball franchise, and that's basically it. And then you got Pocahontas. Like, so if you don't have the representation, like people aren't going to invest. People aren't going to, even though you exist in some cases, which sounds awful, but like
100%.
Until you have a place, like until you're seen, you just won't be.
Yeah. And like having had students ask me in different programs at other institutions, are there Native Americans? I'm like, yes, yes. And it's like, where do they live? In houses like you live, or apartments like you live, wherever their economic status is. And it's like, there's this idea of what a Native American person is.
Right.
And then there's the reality of this is a person who identifies as a Native American, and that shapes their everything.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a lot.
When we were doing the work with the African American History and Education Commission that wrapped up a month or so ago, like it was so difficult, like solely focusing on the African American experience in the U.S. because there's so much overlap with indigenous. Like when you get into conversation about when the U.S. started to define what race was, like you couldn't divorce, that blackness from indigenous because it was really white and other, right? And so like there were indigenous people who were enslaved, like there were interracial, like you couldn't separate. So we found ourselves constantly having to be like, this part here we have to say something to mention indigenous because although it's not directly African American, there is this overlap that we would be remiss and we would do a disservice to the students if we didn't mention or bring light to.
And then like going off of that between like Black community and Native community, because they were all lumped together as other, that caused tension and division within like, communities as well. So it's like, well, I know that we are close, but we can't be because we're not the same because I'm this and you're that. No. Yeah. So, all the trauma that goes with that as well.
Well, and that, look, speaking of podcasts going places we didn't intend to, like, I feel like, to paint a metaphor, like minorities in the U.S. tend to be, or they try to set up minorities in the U.S. to be crabs in a bucket, right? Yeah. Like one of them trying to get out, like if you have a bucket of crabs, like you can leave them out there without the lid. Why? Because when one tries to climb out, the herd's going to bring them back in. So like either we're all oppressed or none of us are oppressed kind of thing. So like it kind of pits minority groups against each other as opposed to collectively trying to rise. And it's just like, if we could just get out of this mindset, we could make so much progress.
Yeah, exactly.
But
it's so frustrating. Like if you're a citizen, you should be treated the same. Okay? You're supposed to be. And yet there's the obvious one, actually. It's the action. It's like, all right, fine. Great. Just say you don't want to. Yeah. It's exhausting.
We got a little off track, but Leah, what's the coolest object you've seen, touched, or smelled?
Getting back.
I almost forgot what we were talking about.
I mean,
it's good conversations.
We're going to circle back, don't worry. So, October 19th is Yorktown Day. Yorktown Day is the day they acknowledge the victory at Yorktown. Okay, so you guys already know where I'm going with this. The American Revolutionary Museum at Yorktown. It's one of my favorite places to go. The coolest object I've ever seen was the Book of Negroes. It's the book that records the people who left with the British after the Revolution. It also records the people who were enslaved and were taken with the British loyalists. Yeah. And for years I was like, oh, this is amazing, this book where it's like those that got out, they were free, they left. Did not know until I read this Canadian book on loyalists that people were still enslaved. And I was like, you mean to tell me my entire life I had this book that's an amazing piece, which it is, 100% it is. The only one of the few artifacts that I ever want to actually touch and put my face really close to the glass, like, you know better, but I need to see as much as I can. And it was just like this experience because I had waited to see it my entire life because it's like in Nova Scotia or somewhere in Canada. I'm like, well, I'll get there eventually, but it's not on the list. But it was at Yorktown for an exhibit on Unseen No Longer, something like that, of people who served in the American Revolution that you don't hear about unless you're a weirdo like me that searches for it.
Yeah, sure.
So that was an amazing experience to just like, that's the one, it's right there. So yeah.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else from either of you?
I'm good.
So,
tune in next week.
Yeah, I feel like this is a pretty good episode. I think. Some good conversation. We I don't want to say we got off the rails or we just that lever in the train tracks when you tilt it and it just goes the other way. We just went around. We just took the scenic route.
Yeah,
but
scenic route for sure.
We arrived nonetheless. Well, thank you all for tuning in to the mailbag. Remember to send your questions in to info@miltonmuseum.org or via social media. And make sure you tune in Monday 9 a.m. for the next episode. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good one.